I think probably every second semester Greek course, no matter how you carve it up, ends up with me verbs. And me verbs are often feared by students. I think it's because by the end of the second semester your brain is just exhausted. And sometimes professors don't even get this far in whatever textbook they're using and do me verbs maybe at the beginning of a third semester, but really me verbs aren't that big of a deal. I'm telling you, they really aren't. It's all in your head that me verbs are these horrible, horrible things. And after all, in our current cultural climate, why wouldn't we be interested in learning more about me, right? And so there are really only two and a half things, maybe a smidge more, about me verbs that are weird. And they're not hard things to grasp. Once you have it, you've got it. And so I want to tell you the two and a half things that are different about me verbs. So all the verbs that you've had so far are omega verbs. Luo, blepo. They end in omega in their default. Now there are deponents, like erkamai, but that's really just a variation of an omega verb that doesn't have an omega. But it's still an omega in the omega conjugation, we say. There is another conjugation, the me conjugation, but thankfully it's mostly like the omega conjugation. There are only two and a half places, I'm saying two and a half, where it deviates a little bit. And here they are, just to tell you where we're going with this. Me verbs have a funny reduplication with an iota in the present stem. So you see, the heart of hearts of this word, didomi, means to give. It's an important word. You should know didomi. It means to give, I give. So the heart and heart is this donation in the middle there. And so the present, for whatever reason, does this reduplication. So the delta gets a little beside itself, and you stick an iota in the middle. Remember, this is not the perfect. The perfect reduplicates with an epsilon. That's different. Even me verbs reduplicate in the perfect with an epsilon. So the reduplication doesn't make it perfect. It's the reduplication with an epsilon that makes it perfect. I'll leave it at that. So this funny reduplication that happens in the present stem, that's one of the weird things about me verbs. And what the reason why this throws students off is because, if we started with the future tense of me verbs, they would look perfectly normal. The problem is that they're weird in what usually is your starting point, the present tense. Okay, so funny reduplication in the present stem is the first weird thing about me verbs. The second weird thing about me verbs is they have slightly different present active endings, as I'll show you in a second. Now, some of them are the same, but some of them, like the me, for example, this me is a first-person singular. It's the very first ending you learn with a me verb. Ditto me means I give. And so there are slightly different endings, like me, in the present active. And then I'm calling it a half, okay? Me verbs sometimes do a kappa instead of a sigma in the aorist tense. So instead of a sigma alpha in the aorist, sometimes with a me verb you get a kappa alpha. Okay, I didn't invent this language, but we can deal with it. So here are the two and a half things that are slightly weird about me verbs. And if you got these, you got it. Now, I have songs for both of them. So in two songs, you can learn the weird things about me verbs. Here's the first one. Roy Skelly came up with it. I'm just passing it along. So ditto me, dittos, ditto si, ditto me, dittos, ditto si, did amen, did te, did si. Okay, so there you have the two of our weird things are in this song. So first of all, we have slightly different endings. So me is I, give. Sigma, though, I've seen a sigma in the second person singular. Oh, ace. Okay, so actually, I can deal with that. Now this is different here. I'm used to the C being a third person plural, and here it's a third person singular. And both of them can have the movable nu. I'm sorry, I didn't invent this language. One difference is you'll notice that the connecting vowel in the singular is an omega, it's long, whereas in the plural it's an omicron, short. And so that's another characteristic of me verbs in their present active conjugation, is you got these long vowels in the singular and short vowels in the plural. Now I know some of you are saying, how am I going to know that? How am I going to know whether that's subjunctive or not? I'm sorry. Sometimes a long connecting vowel doesn't mean a subjunctive. But anyway, I'm going to get, my cliches get you most of the way, and then inevitably Greek defies, simplicity. But anyway, so if you know this song, ditto me, ditto si, you know two of the weird things about me verbs. One of which is the weird endings, and the other is this funny reduplication with an iota on the front. I know this is present stem because of the funny reduplication. By the way, the imperfect tense is built off the present stem. Remember that? There are two tenses built off the present stem, the present tense and the imperfect tense. So the imperfect tense in me verbs will also have the funny reduplication, but there'll be an augment on the front and the normal endings. Okay, so see the slightly different endings and see that the stem has been reduplicated with an iota. The heart of heart stem is that delta omicron, the do, a stem, the stem of ditto me. Anyway, so if you know this first song here, then you know the first two weird things about the present active. Okay, what about the half weird thing? So here's another song. We see the underlying stem once we leave the present stem. So once we leave the present tense and the imperfect tense, then we see the heart of hearts stem, the real stem, the underlying stem of a me verb. So if I know the six principal parts of ditto me, then I know the half one. Remember, the half one is the kappa, alpha, and the aorist. Ditto me, do, so, edo, kada, do, ga, deda, my, eda, thane. Ditto me, do, so, edo, kada, do, ga, deda, my, eda, thane. So if you know those two songs, ditto me, dittos, ditto, si, and ditto me, do, so. If you know those two songs, then you've got the weirdness of the me verb. So see how the aorist here has a kappa alpha instead of a sigma alpha. But notice that it's pretty regular, actually. So in the present, that's where it's weird. It has the funny reduplication with an iota on the front and the funny ending me. But if I know that the underlying stem is delta omicron, then here in the future, it's just added a sigma, just like the other futures I know have added a sigma. And it does an augment in the aorist indicative, and it does a kappa alpha instead of a sigma alpha. But it's much like the aorist. It's just traded out the kappa for the sigma. The perfect, the rest of these are pretty regular. The perfect reduplicates with an epsilon. Present reduplicates with an iota. Perfect still reduplicates with an epsilon. Perfect still reduplicates with an epsilon. Perfect active still has a kappa alpha. How are you going to tell the difference between these two? Well, the perfect is reduplicated, and this just has an augment. And then once again, the perfect Miller passive shoves the ending right onto the stem. Now here, I added a theta eta in the aorist passive. That's what I did in the omega conjugation, and we have an augment. So actually, this is very regular. You can see in this one chart the 2.5 irregular things about me verbs. They have different endings in the present. They reduplicate with an iota in the present, and then they sometimes, not always, but they sometimes have a kappa alpha in the perfect. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you some variations. So first of all, there's ditto me. This is the omicron variation of the me verbs. With tithe me, let me give you the epsilon variation of the me verbs. It's going to be very much like the present active indicative. In fact, I could sing it to the same song. Tithe me, tithes, tithe si, tithe men, tithe te, tithe si. It's very much the same as ditto me. Notice again that I have long vowels in the singular and short vowels in the plural. So this is an epsilon me verb. Now this is a funny reduplication with an iota, but it's perfectly normal reduplication in terms of the tau. This is something I haven't emphasized that much this semester, but let me remind you of a little detail, and that is that breathy letters like theta reduplicate with their unvoiced equivalent. So theta is a dental, tau, delta, theta, and tau is the unvoiced version. They're all done teethy, dentals. And so this reduplication of a theta with a tau is perfectly normal for reduplication. So there you have it. Notice again that we have AC, and then the epsilon is a short eta. So there's the epsilon version of a me verb. Well, finally, let me show you the alpha version of a me verb. Tithemi means to put or to place. Histemi means to stand or to cause to stand. It's an alpha me verb, and so again I could sing the same song. Histemi, histes, histesi, histamen, histate, hista Okay, so once again we have long vowels in the singular and short vowels in the plural. Notice that here, rather than have an alpha alpha, it just combined the two alphas into one long alpha with a police line over the top. Now, sigmas sometimes, this is a funny thing, sigmas sometimes seem to reduplicate with a rough breathing mark. I don't know why, but there is at least the iota on front. That is the funny reduplication of the sigma. And then the rough breathing mark is, I guess, an equivalent of sorts to reduplicating with a sigma. This one's a little weird, but histemi, to stand. You can see stand, right? STA. You can see the Indo-European family there, where STA is part of stand even in English. So this one you can learn. That's pretty much me verbs. No reason to get all worked up, because there are really only 2.5 irregular things. 1, different endings in the present active. 2, funny reduplication in the present. And 3, sometimes there's a kappa alpha in the aorist instead of a sigma alpha. I say sometimes because actually histemi does the normal sigma alpha in the aorist. Who knew? And there you have the me verbs.